Good morning, everyone. Sorry, I just wanted to make sure we started recording so this can be viewed later. Welcome. We're so glad to see you all. I'm Amanda Zeidner. I'm a program manager for community planning at Council for Watershed Health. Today, we acknowledge that the lands and waters in the Upper Santa Clara River IRWM region are unceded ancestral homelands of many tribal communities, including the Serrano, Gabrielino, Tongva, Ventureño, Chumash, and Ferdinino Tataviam nations. We gratefully acknowledge the Native peoples on whose homelands we live and who are the ancestral stewards of the land and water. We make this acknowledgement out of respect for their longstanding connection to and protection of this area's watershed. We urge you to learn more about how to engage with tribal communities in your water work by attending the Allyship with Tribal Communities workshop in August and September. You can scan this QR code with your phone to register today, and a link can also be found in the chat to sign up. It may just be for one of the August dates, but there are going to be a number of workshops held throughout August and September that we'd love for you to attend. Thank you so much.
Apologies. We can go over our agenda for today. We have a lot to cover in the next 2 hours. So please, if you need to step away, we do understand. And if you do so, please turn off your video, your microphone. But we encourage you to use your chat throughout today's session. We will have a breakout session where we will ask you to come back on and unmute and show your video. So we do ask that you're engaged today. And the next 2 hours is going to go by very quickly. I'm going to introduce Peter Massey now, and Peter can kind of set the scene for us today.
Thank you, Atlee, and good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Peter Massey with Tree People. We're an environmental nonprofit organization serving Los Angeles County for almost 50 years now. And for the past 3 of those years, we've been honored to lead a broad partnership delivering the Water Talks program on behalf of LA County. Our closest partner is the Council for Watershed Health, as well as Stantec, who are providing today's training. We are also honored to serve as watershed coordinator for this area through the Safe Clean Water program. So what is Water Talks? It's a publicly funded program that seeks to raise those voices that are usually not heard in watershed planning. It also includes Native American tribes whose families have cared for this region's water for thousands of years. Thus far, the Water Talks program has included community engagement and a thorough needs assessment. We now offer an education series to share what we've been learning. Today's workshop will focus on how 2 programs, Integrated Regional Water Management and the Safe Clean Water program, can support collaboration and community engaged planning. The second workshop will look at partnerships between community organizations and public agencies. The third workshop will provide guidance and perspective on engaging our local Native American tribes, as we've already mentioned, and that will be led by our partners at Sacred Places Institute for Indigenous Peoples. The Water Talks series will conclude with site visits to examples of well-engaged projects and the chance to network in person with other participants. Before we continue, I want to thank the entities who have made this program possible. That includes Proposition 1, passed by the people of California, the California Department of Water Resources, the Greater LA County, the Upper Santa Clara River, and the Watersheds Coalition of Ventura County IRWM regions, and the LA Ventura Water Talks Task Force. And finally, in the face of increasing challenges to our water security, we really feel it's vital to have every voice included so we can assure a water resilient future together. Thank you, and thank you again for joining us today. Atlee, I turn it back over to you.
Thanks so much, Peter. And I'm going to introduce my colleague, Emily Finnegan, to help us get some background information on watershed management.
Excellent. Thank you, Atlee. And thank you all so much for being here with us today. Great to see some of you in the room that are familiar to me and some new names as well. So before we dive into the policies and practices of integrated watershed management, we want to make sure we're starting with the basics. So what is a watershed? A watershed is a land area that captures all of the rainfall and snowmelt, channels that water into creeks, streams, and rivers that then flow out into a common outlet, such as a reservoir, a bay, or the ocean. So when we talk about the watershed of the Santa Clara River, we're talking about all of the surrounding areas that channel water into the river. A fun fact that you may not know, in the 19th century, the term watershed came to be known as the dividing line. That's actually where the phrase watershed moment comes from. It's that division. Our water is ancient. Earth's hydrologic system is a closed loop system, which means that we have the same amount of water on this planet that we did when Earth first formed millions of years ago. We used to tell our elementary school students that you're actually drinking dinosaur pee. According to geologists, over 10 million years ago, the Los Angeles region was submerged in water, and the formation of mountain ranges in what is now the San Fernando and San Gabriel valleys created those valleys. The water that we rely on each and every day, the water that many of you have a hand in managing, took hundreds of thousands of years to accumulate. The Santa Clara River is the largest natural or unaltered river in Southern California, and it spans Los Angeles and Ventura counties. The river originates in the northern slope of the San Gabriel Mountains near Acton, traverses through Los Angeles County into Ventura County, and ultimately flows into the Pacific Ocean, covering a little over 1,600 square miles of land in total. Now, the entirety of the watershed is hydrologically connected by the river. However, it is jurisdictionally bisected by county lines. Approximately 40% of the watershed is in Los Angeles County, and the other 60% falls within Ventura County. For the purposes of today's session, we're going to be focusing on that upper portion of the watershed that falls within Los Angeles County, which could be more specifically defined as the Upper Santa Clara River watershed, though our expert panelists will share more about how coordination occurs across those two counties. Throughout the watershed, the river traverses cities, farms, and undeveloped lands. It's an incredibly diverse watershed, from very rural, unincorporated communities. About 57% of the watershed is open space, to very urban areas. The upper portion of the watershed is home to a population of about 280,000 people, of which around 200,000 reside within the city of Santa Clarita, which is the third largest city in Los Angeles County. And that juxtaposition of urban and rural create a really unique landscape for the Upper Santa Clara River watershed region. And that's part of what we're here to talk about today, is how to better integrate and collaborate across the region to create opportunities and partnerships that benefit both communities and the watershed. Now, in today's session, as Peter noted, we're talking about the Integrated Regional Water Management Program in the context of the Disadvantaged Community Involvement Program, and I'll touch more on those policies later today. But one thing to note, as the state defines disadvantaged community, that means that it's an area with a median household income that's less than 80% of the statewide average. However, we know that median household income doesn't always capture all of the underrepresented or underserved communities in the state. And though there are few communities in Upper Santa Clara River that qualify as disadvantaged using that median household income metric, we know that there are communities that are chronically underrepresented in water infrastructure discussions, particularly in rural areas of the watershed, that don't always have access to the same resources as more populous communities. The entirety of this region, whether the urban portions or the more rural portions, rely on water. Human civilizations grew out of water, and being social is intimately linked to our human relationship to water. Over the course of today's sessions, we're going to assess and really wrestle with our roles within the watershed. And our goal is that you come out of today's session with a deeper understanding of the principles of watershed management that you see here on the screen from that integrated and coordinated perspective. So before we jump into some of the meat and potatoes of today's conversation, we want to better understand what brings you all here today and why, what your community's primary water challenge looks like across this region. So Atlee is going to switch us over to Mentimeter. If you can all follow that link that she just dropped in the chat, give us a chance to hear from you all. And in that Mentimeter link, if you could share your community's primary water challenge. If you're unable to access the link, you can also see there in the top of the screen. If you go to menti.com and use that code, you should be able to access it. Okay, we see distribution. Interesting. Would love to dig into that's distribution of funding, distribution of resources, of water itself, water quality, drought. Certainly that is rising to the top here. You can see as they get larger, that means they've been submitted by more than one person. Funding is a huge challenge. Water quality is rising to the top here. Certainly we'll touch on that in our breakout groups. Supply, I'm seeing infiltration, groundwater contaminants, and how that pertains to water quality, lawns. I'm sure we'll get into water conservation as well, water safety, decreased state water project allocation, which touches on supply, water shortages, water to fight fires. Yeah, that flood, fire, drought cycle, and how we can better create more resilient communities across all three of those. Water supply isn't diverted, infiltration, hard water, respect. Interesting. Would love to dig into that. Whoever shared that comment, hopefully you can share more in your breakout groups. Climate change, perhaps the one thing that connects all of these pieces. Excellent. Well, feel free to continue adding your community's primary water challenge in there. We're eager to hear from you all, and that will prime our conversation for our breakout group shortly. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to my colleague Atlee to kind of dig into, now that we have this foundation of what a watershed is, what we're talking about when we talk about the Santa Clara River watershed, how that translates into integrated planning.
Thanks so much, Emily. And we'll move into this next piece that Emily was talking about. As we talk about the challenges that we're all facing, we're all noting, we also want to keep in mind how we got here. Historically, both in this watershed, but also across the state, we've dissected every part of the water cycle. The 20th century was characterized by this mindset of the assembly line. We divided things into the smallest increments possible with the goal of increasing productivity. We did that for education, city planning, healthcare. Really, we did it for everything, surely including water. And now in the 21st century, we're experiencing the unintended consequences of those decisions of the past. We recognize how decision-making of historical decision-making has led us to the circumstances of today. We see sprawl development and patchwork ecosystem protection, deferred maintenance on critical infrastructure, overlap in jurisdictional authorities, environmental harms, social inequities. Our institutional systems of the past weren't necessarily developed with the goal of incentivizing collaboration, and that creates barriers for our ability to coordinate planning today. As we push towards collaboration, we can see how over time humans have had this tendency to dominate our natural resources. Man was believed to be the highest evolved creature, greater than all others, including women, who, according to this illustration, were equal to whales and only slightly greater than dogs. And since humans above all else were above all else, they were able to control all of the natural world. Both individually and in our specific sectors, People tend to see themselves at the top of this pyramid with our natural resources below us, in which case these resources were treated as commodities to dominate and or compete over. Across California, our water history is the tale of building pipes, dams, cement channels, pulling water from where it flows naturally to where we want it and need it to be. This is a picture of Bouquet Canyon Reservoir, 15 miles west of Palmdale, built in 1934 as part of the LA Aqueduct system. Cities have largely been constructed using hard infrastructure engineering and more reactionary approaches. Our reliance on hard infrastructure over time has externalized other lasting problems, creating this continual reliance on the built environment. But the natural systems, especially in the Upper Santa Clara River watershed, are assets that can be managed with integration and collaborative strategies. As communities have developed across the entire region, new systems have been developed to manage very specific water needs. And now we're left with these countless systems of different scales, different technologies, and decision-making structures. By dividing up these components over time, our water management is really sectored out. And as a result, it's become highly specialized, highly standardized, very efficient. And while that does serve a purpose, it's also led to more decentralized decision-making and technical-only planning and management approaches. We've seen how point-in-time decision-making, single problem, single solution, isolated thinking isn't serving us or our communities, because what we've built is being unmade by the passage of time. You can see in these pictures the St. Francis Dam failure that took place in 1928, almost 100 years ago, took the lives of over 400 people. That dam was ultimately replaced by the Bouquet Canyon Dam we saw in a previous picture. And while this is a dated picture, it does reveal how our historical over-reliance on gray infrastructure has impacted us and will continue to impact us in very significant ways. We also recognize the drought, fire, flood cycle as well, which will continue on its own. And now we're learning to think in tandem with this natural system and understand how it influences planning. We can look at that integration and thinking with the natural system through the perspective of socio-ecological systems, which recognizes the connection between the human world and the natural world, creating complementary outcomes of equity and sustainability instead of approaching those independently. When we look at all of the interconnected components, topics, issues that impact a watershed, we can identify the shared goals for the economic, ecological, and social well-being, also while taking into account the natural, physical, and hydrologic constraints of the region. As we move toward a change in framework, we recognize a change in relationship with our ecological systems. Anything that we as humans do in our social systems impacts the natural systems, which we are dependent on for our survival. In mindset and in managerial practice, we can reimagine and restructure how society, us as people, interact with natural flows. In this perspective, humans are part of the system as opposed to separate from it. As integrated approaches considers various sources and purposes of water are all together, whether that's groundwater, wastewater, et cetera, it recognizes the interconnectedness across the watershed system. It also recognizes the interactions and causal relationships between the physical world and the human world. That integration reduces complexity and improves water management overall, while also providing those economic, environmental, and social benefits. Integration challenges our traditional modes of operation. It requires us to push those boundaries, approach questions from an adaptive, comprehensive, and collaborative mindset. But we know collaboration takes time. On the long-range perspective, we're still in the early days and we're constantly learning, we're adapting and evolving our approaches. We're building that momentum and a shared understanding of what collaboration is. And together we are making progress and we're moving that dial forward. And we can continue to do so with a systems thinking mindset. Systems thinking is looking at things as a whole rather than a bunch of isolated components, because it recognizes that the system is the product of the interaction of its parts. Through systems thinking, we seek to understand the bigger picture, but also recognize the patterns and trends within the system, recognizing cause and effect relationships, predicting unintended consequences, and identifying points to leverage in order to change a system. We'll go through a very quick example for some of us coffee drinkers as to illustrate what systems thinking can look like. So let's say it's Monday morning, or it's this week, it's Tuesday morning, feeling like a Monday morning. You didn't get enough sleep and now you're tired. With a traditional thinking approach, you decide to drink coffee throughout the day to stay awake. However, this leads you to stay up late and continue the cycle of tiredness the next day. You can see how this cycle will then reinforce itself and continue to lead to the same or worsening outcome that you were trying to avoid from the beginning. With a systems thinking approach, you'd sit down and look at all of the factors that lead you to feeling tired each day. You realize that your intake of caffeine is leading you to stay up late and therefore making you continuously tired. With this systems thinking approach, you come to a new outcome. You decide to limit your coffee intake, even though you're tired. And later that night, you fall asleep more easily and wake up well rested. We know that this is a small and simple example, but it does show the fact that when we take the time to look at the broader system at work, we can identify new solutions that address our challenges from a more holistic perspective. So at this point, we are going to practice our systems thinking in real time and in relationship to the watershed. You will be asked to join a breakout room very shortly, and you'll get a notification. Go ahead and accept that breakout room, and your facilitator will guide you through the next activity.